We were at the part of the story where Jesus is weary. Anne Lamott, in her book Plan B, Further Thoughts on Faith, said this: I don't have the right personality for Good Friday, for the crucifixion. I just want to skip ahead to the resurrection. In fact, she said, I'd like to skip ahead to the resurrection version of one of the kids in our children's ministry who drew a picture of the Easter bunny outside of the tomb with the title, Everlasting Life in a Basket Full of Chocolates. Now you're talking, she said. Why don't we jump ahead to Easter? Why do we need to pause at the cross? What is the purpose of all this talk about the cross? Can't we talk about something positive, the uplifting parts of the story, the loving grace of God, the mercy, the forgiveness, the acceptance, the pardon? We'd like to. We try to. But as Fred Craddock, a well-known preacher and teacher, says, sooner or later, somebody is going to say to you, then what happened to Jesus? And when you tell them the truth, that he came to the city of Jerusalem as a 33-year-old radical and stirred the city, and the city turned on him, and just like that, put him on trial and executed him, Fred Craddock said, some people are going to back away. So we say, can't we just leave that part out? Focus on the positive. People aren't interested in a man who dies like that. Fred Craddock says it's a terrible growth strategy for the church, all that morbid suffering and bleeding and dying. And yet, we live in a world where suffering and bleeding and dying are part of our daily experience. Think of just this week alone. Think of the violence, the gun violence. Think of the natural disasters. That's on a big scale. Think of the pain, the loss, the brokenness, the suffering in our daily lives. So how do we reconcile this suffering with this God who loves and cares for us? Are these not the questions that we carry around with us every day? And so on this night, as we sit at the foot of the cross, we're reminded that we follow the one who came to live among us, to share our lives, not in some superficial way, but totally, painfully, fully, and lovingly. See, the story of Jesus in this last week that ends tonight, the story of Jesus coming into the city is a powerful one. He does something brave, courageous. He comes in being greeted as if he were a king. The Roman Empire did not miss that gesture. They were always on the lookout for people who might be seeking after power. Because, see, that was the game they played. They knew that game well, and they played it hard and well. He came humbled But nevertheless, he was greeted as a king entering into this holy city in this holy week of Jerusalem. And he had not been there very long before he went into the temple, which every pilgrim would have done that week of Passover. He went in, and usually what would have happened as he entered the temple is that a faithful Jew would offer a sacrifice on the altar. But what did Jesus do? He turned things upside down. He threw out the money changers. He said their priorities were upside down. This mysterious one, riding on a donkey, all of a sudden has become very political, taking the stance of someone who understands the role of power, who understands people who get their priorities confused. It's a reminder that following Jesus is risky business. It's a reminder of our mission as God's people. That sometimes, as followers of Jesus, it leads to trials, to persecution, to crucifixions of our own. But that is the point of God coming to share our lives, not in some superficial way, but becoming part of our struggle to live as human beings. A reminder, again, of the mandate for us to care for all of God's children, especially the least and the lost and the lonely. One of the most important books in the last century, there was a book written by a theologian, Moltmann, entitled The Crucified God. In this book, Moltmann remembers how the world changed for him in July 1943, when, as a 17-year-old member of the German army, he witnessed and survived the firebombing of his hometown of Hamburg, in which civilian casualties numbered 40,000 people. As a young theologian, he asked, "Where is God in all of this? Where is God in the suffering and pain of this world?" He said he will always remember the day when he made the connection between the cross of Christ, the suffering of God, and the suffering of innocent civilians and Jewish people in the concentration camps. See, that's why we have all this talk about the cross. Because Jesus didn't suffer to keep us from suffering. Jesus suffered because we already suffer. Jesus suffered and shows God's vulnerability, God's identification with you and with me. We do not need to go seeking the cross. The cross already stands in the midst of life. And the question before us is, will we be faithful to that cross? And if we are, it reveals to us a God who does not stand aloof, a God who does not wag a finger at us, but a God who empties God's self for us, who comes as close as possible to us to bring us hope and healing. Fred Craddock, in one of his very famous books, One of his very famous books where he has a group of his sermons, it's called Cherry Log Sermons. And in that, there is one of his sermons entitled, Why the Cross? And he describes a most common human experience. A child falls down and skins a knee or elbow and comes running to their parent. The parent picks up the child and says, in the oldest myth in the world, let me kiss it and make it well. The parent picks up the child, kisses the skinned place, holds the child in their lap, and all is well. Did their kiss make it well? No. It was that 10 minutes in their lap. Just sit in the lap of love and see the parent crying. Why are you crying? The child might say, I'm the one who hurt my elbow. And the parent says, because you hurt, I hurt. That does more for the child than all the bandages and medicine in the world just sitting in their lap. Fred Craddock says the story of Jesus coming to dwell among us begins on Christmas and ends here on Good Friday. It is the story from beginning to end of God stooping to pick us up. He said, we thought if there were to be business between us and God, we must somehow get up to God. Then God came down to the level of the cross, all the way down to the depths of brokenness, evil, hate, dare we say hell. And God still stoops in your life and mine. What is the cross? Craddock asks. Can I say it this way? It is to sit for a few minutes in the lap of God who hurts because you hurt. So tonight, may you and I find a way to pause and ponder and stand just a few more minutes at the foot of the cross in the lap of God. Amen.